Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm so glad to have you with me. I'm Matt Kurtin, the Senior Director of Technology and Visual Design at Innovative Learning Group, where we design and develop practical learning solutions that help medium and large-size organizations move the needle on employee performance. Before we dive in, let me tell you just a little bit more about Innovative Learning Group. ILG is a performance-first learning company. We were founded in 2004 by our owner and CEO, Lisa Tunegas. And I'm proud to say that this year we're celebrating our 20th anniversary, and I've been with ILG that whole time. We have more than 200 clients in 35 industries, and we're also a certified women's business enterprise. Please chime in at any time during the session with questions or comments by using the chat feature. For those of you who are not familiar with Zoom, this is located at the bottom of your screen. You may have to scroll all the way down to make this feature visible. Immediately following the webinar, you're going to receive an email with a link to a short survey. Of course, as learning people, we love to get your feedback. Please note that we're going to be showing some video clips in this session, but they aren't going to be available outside of the session. But you will receive next week a YouTube along with the slide deck. Some of my colleagues are on the line with me today to assist with fielding questions if necessary. So don't be surprised if they join in on the line at some point later in the presentation. I'd like to reserve most of the time for the content, so I will keep my introduction very brief. I've been in the learning field for 28 years, so I've seen the technology progress from CD-ROM to web to mobile to the technologies that we'll be talking about today, which I have been working on for the last 7 or 8 years, I would say. For more details about me, you can find my bio on the ILG website and/or on LinkedIn. I'd like to start right off with a poll question here. And the question is, how familiar are you with artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, and spatial computing, which are the topics that we'll be talking about today? So go ahead and make your choices there. Okay, looks like most people have had a chance to vote there. And I'm seeing a mix across the different things there. And I would say it looks like artificial intelligence is getting some of the highest familiarity, and I'm not surprised because it's all over the news quite a bit. And then kind of split between the other ones. And then spatial computing, I wouldn't be surprised if it's different here as it's showing because it has not been in the news for as long. It's been more recent and maybe not as widespread. So my hope is that we work through these topics, you'll become a little bit more familiar with all of them. So starting with artificial intelligence, the capability of computer systems or algorithms to imitate intelligent human behavior. So you see across the top here a few graphics. The first one is from a movie, I think around 2016 or so, Artificial Intelligence by Steven Spielberg, the story of an artificial intelligence that wants to become human. And in the middle, probably almost everyone will be familiar with how computers got smarter and smarter to where IBM Watson was good enough to beat a human at Jeopardy. And that was notable because that kind of game asks the questions in such a way that it requires reasoning to do so. But the picture I find the most interesting here is the one on the top right of Alan Turing. And that's because I think people tend to see artificial intelligence as something that just sprang up recently. But actually all the way back in 1950, Alan Turing proposed what was called the Turing test, that if artificial intelligence was sufficiently good at chatting, that you could chat back and forth on a computer and you could not recognize whether it was a human or a computer, that it would be considered artificially intelligent. I think certainly with some chats that we've done within online text chat, it's reached that point where it could fool at least a number of people some of the time. And what's interesting is as artificial intelligence continues to advance, we may see that it's not only in text-based chat, but it may become in video chat in Zoom. You can't tell whether it's AI or a person. So it'll be interesting to see how it progresses. But what I really want to turn our attention to today is how AI could be used for the development of learning. And we're going to look at it from the point of view of an instructional designer and from the point of view of a media developer who may be developing content and authoring tool. So starting with AI for instructional design, I worked together with some instructional designers at Innovative Learning Group to see what kind of tasks that instructional designers normally do that AI could help out with. So you see the bullets on the left, things like summarizing content, converting into bullets and out, creating questions or content, writing learning objectives, and brainstorming ideas. And so I looked at quite a number of different tools, probably 30 different tools that would help. And some of the ones shown on the slide are the ones that turned out to be most helpful for instructional design. ChatGPT, just because it's general purpose and can do lots of things. And the other three, Magic School, Quillions, and QuizGecko, specifically for tasks for instructional design. Magic School, albeit aimed a little bit more for K through 12 than the others. Very interesting, the types of questions that would get created by Quillions or QuizGecko. So in some cases, you would get questions where the answer is just a statement with a fill in the blank, and one of the words is the right answer, and distractors are created. And with that type of question, the question really isn't very interesting, and sometimes it seems quite random, like they picked a word out at random to replace. But the question and answers are always right. With other types of questions, AI took a shot at formulating a question and answers, and it was much more creative in how it created the questions, more interesting questions. But the drawback to that one is it had to really double check because sometimes the questions weren't on topic, or sometimes the answers weren't even correct that it said were the correct answers. So where it took more of a risk in being creative, sometimes it was not successful. The other thing that we found is that it depends on what type of content you're designing, that if you are creating a generic type of content, maybe in the realm of leadership or time management, where there's lots of information on the internet, AI was much, much better. You could just give it a basic prompt, create a course, and it could create an outline and create content and nearly nail it all on the generic content. But as we move towards more custom content that was specific to an organization, we found that oftentimes when you asked it to create an outline or create content, it would do it, but it was not at all helpful. And if you asked it to be more careful, it would still claim that it could do it, even though it really was way off track. So let's look at writing learning objectives particularly. And in this example, it was with ChatGPT. And the prompt that I created was suggest some learning objectives for how to operate a pharmaceutical clean room. And it came back with a number of objectives, and it seemed to be reasonably on topic. But knowing that instructional designers often want to write well-formed learning objectives, I went back and asked it to revise those again. And I said, please revise the objectives so they are written as observable three-part learning objectives. And it did, and it came back and it put all the objectives as three-part learning objectives. But in discussing it with instructional designers who are more versed than I, they said as we repeated this type of test time after time, when it created the three-part learning objectives, it didn't really seem like ChatGPT was being very careful about what is the verb that we're getting to try them to do and aligning it with what would need to be practiced in the real world. So although it had kind of the basic content right and it returned it in the format that we wanted it to be in, it was not as good as if a real instructional designer had given thought to what the objectives would be, which I think is not surprising. Next is content refinement. And looking at the examples here, this is from Magic School. And it has a bunch of different tools for things like, okay, take this text and adapt it to fit a certain reading level, or proof this, or rewrite it to make it more concise, or summarize it. So these are things Magic School could do and aim particularly at refining content, but found that could do similar things with ChatGPT as well. Then one of the things that I think really is helpful is brainstorming. So list 50 things I could do to prevent contamination in a clean room. And within a couple of seconds, lo and behold, 50 things come back. And what I think is valuable about the brainstorming thing is here we're not making the assumption that AI is providing a finished content that we know is right and we just plop it in. We're trying to think and make sure we didn't miss anything. And we ask the AI to work with us to generate other ideas. And if you go in with that approach in mind and you have it generate a bunch of ideas and then you say, most of these I already thought of, some of these are not good, but hey, look, here's a place where it did help me or a couple places where it did help me. It could be valuable in that way as a brainstorming tool for instructional designers. Now, moving on to those folks who might be working in Articulate Rise or Storyline or Captivate. Text to speech, we use quite often here to well said to generate audio to go into courses. You see another examples of a couple other examples of tools that do the same thing, Speechify, Amazon Polly, and I'm going to bet you could probably find 100 other tools that do text to speech. But if you have not experienced it, I'll play a quick clip here, and you can see that it's not the way it was several years ago, where the computer-generated audio clearly sounded terrible. It's sounding pretty good these days.
Hi, welcome to Patient-Centered Pharmaceuticals, where we use virtual reality to train 3 critical clean room skills: holding your arms in neutral position, moving slowly, and avoiding contact.
So we used Well Said to create this, and we ended up putting it in our real virtual reality project. Another tool, reverse direction, speech to text. You could use Amazon Transcribe, Audio Type, or Elevate AI. You can also just take a video and load it into SharePoint if you have Microsoft 365, and it will automatically transcribe it for you. Where this is really great is if you have a video that you're going to put into a course and you don't have a transcript for it, it will make a transcript that's probably 90%, 95%, depending on what was being discussed, correct, and you can go in and then edit it much faster and nicer than rekeying it all by hand to get your captions or your transcript for your course. Another area where AI can help is in audio editing. So if you're used to using tools like SoundForge or Audacity to edit, you will know that it will look like the waveforms more in the middle of the screen here, where if you're finding a clip that you want to cut out, you'll kind of play the audio, try to identify where it is in the waveform, play it again maybe a few times to find the spot that you need to edit, and clip that part out and maybe record a new part in. With Audiate, what happens is the audio is automatically transcribed, and then if you want to edit it apart out, you just highlight the word, you would highlight the word click the delete button on your computer, and it will delete that part out of the audio. Super easier audio editing because of the AI features. Text to image. So here you see a number of tools that I tried out to see how it would do on image generation. Luckily, at the time when I tried this, there were free trials for Dolly and Stable Diffusion and Dream and Midjourney, which is the one you see is just the boat there in the logo. Since that time, they were realizing that so many people were using their free image generation to try it out that they kind of got rid of almost all and every free plan so that you need to pay now to generate images. But if you have the paid version of ChatGPT, it does include Dolly for image generation. And you can see here some samples I did using that tool. So widescreen aspect ratio, picture of a clean room used to manufacture vaccines, include 2 operators dressed in clean room gowns. And so it created a couple of options for me here, and always a nice prompt back from ChatGPT. Here are the images used for vaccine manufacturing featuring 2 operators dressed in clean room gowns. Again, it's kind of that thing where it's going to say that it fulfilled your request and be really pleasant about it, whether it really did a good job or didn't do a good job. As I'm not a subject matter expert in clean rooms, I can't say whether this is really a good job, but it looks somewhat reminiscent of images I've seen. But as I did with the learning objectives before, I wanted to see if I could go back and refine the prompt. So I said, please adjust to include a remote access barrier. And that would be the type of thing you've probably seen in pictures where you stick your hands in the gloves in order to manipulate stuff on the other side of the glass so that it won't get contaminated. And so the result I felt was not so great on this one. It did put glass between us and the equipment, but it doesn't have any of the gloves I was expecting that I might see. And it I think the concern is, again, it comes back always thinking it's fulfilled your request, whether it really has or not. One of the things that I am most interested in with these tools is the tools where instead of just doing a new prompt to get it revised, you actually draw on the picture and say, in this area specifically, I want something to go, or you select from a list, because the idea of saying over and over again in the prompts and text to get it revised is a daunting task compared to if you could specifically say, put a remote access barrier glove in this area, and you draw a little blip on the thing where you want it to go. So I expect that those types of interfaces where you leave text only and you work with either a mouse or a stylus or something like that with the image to mark where you want the changes is going to dramatically improve it. Next kind of example here is text to talking head video. So I'm going to play an example from Synthesia.
Here is an example of converting text to video. This could be used for the narrator of an e-learning course.
And then you see rephrase.ai is another competitor that does essentially the same thing. And I'm going to say I was looking the other day for an example to find where two different characters on screen are talking to each other. And in the course of searching for that, I'm going to say, again, there's probably 100 or 200 vendors of this type of tool. And it's also the equivalent roughly of what you're going to see in Articulate Rise, which what was projected to release in July and now I think is projected for September release, that this type of tool will be built into Articulate, so you wouldn't need to go to a third party for it. Next example is text to animated video. So this is the Vyond Go AI edition or AI add-on to Vyond. And here you could pick a topic and a layout. You can see whether you want it to be a conversation, a talking head, a narration, what you want the background setting to be, what you want the vibe and format to be. And then what I did in this example that I'm going to play is I just told it, please create an example teaching how to play the cello. And that's it. And it did the rest from there. And then I'll talk about what I like and what I don't like about that.
I'm a beginner at playing the cello. Do you have any tips for improving my skills?
Absolutely. First, make sure you have proper posture. Sit up straight with your feet flat on the floor and your cello between your knees. This helps with sound quality and prevents injury.
So that gives enough of an idea there. Is only from that prompt, it went and picked out what the content is and created the whole video. I like that it created a nice intro on the train, kind of a starting scene before it transitioned in, and it does a nice outro at the end where it goes back to the scene of the bus they're traveling on. What I don't like about it so much is that the animations that they're doing are really kind of generic animations, like they're moving their hands to show that they're making a point and so on, but they're not about, like, it doesn't make the animations in line with teaching the cello. The other thing that I didn't like is that at the time that this was released, there was no way to provide completely your own script and have it generate the video. It only allowed you to talk about the idea that you wanted and have it automatically created, which again resulted oftentimes in a script that didn't really match what you want. The good news on that is that Vyond Go has announced that they have planned for release in the next couple of weeks a version now where you can provide your complete script and it will make the animation for that script instead of this one where you just give it the idea. You'll have both options. Next example is text to 360 panorama. And this is a tool that could be used to make a 360 image that you could use inside Storyline, or you could use in a VR experience. So here you can see I put in the prompt, futuristic conference center where people could learn about AI. And this is produced by a company called Blockade Labs, and not easy to really show the actual 360 in this webinar. So I have produced a video of me scrolling around, and I can kind of simulate it by dragging the scroll bar here back and forth, that you would end up with the 360 image that you could look around left and right, and also if it were the real 360 video, also up and down. I really like the result that I got here. One thing that I'll say about this, though, is that when I asked for some other types of rooms without that specific prompt, I got a room that was really fairly similar to this one with different decorations, not an entirely different room. Next is a product company, Meshi, that is based on using AI for 3D models. And you can do a text to 3D model where you describe what you want, or an image to 3D model. In this case, what I did is I took a picture with my iPhone of the Elmer's glue. You see on the left side the actual picture that I took, and on the right side you see the result, which looks like it has some holes in it and things in places that don't make sense. But our 3D modelers could take that next and modify it slightly and get it back into good shape. And much quicker by that approach to have them start from the model generated automatically and clean it up to get back to a 3D model that would look right in our spot than to completely do it from scratch. Next is the text, and the way that photo works, I think when it takes the photo, it just looks at the shape of it and tries to make a guess about it. When you do text to 3D model, it seems like what it does is it takes where I put in the prompt of a microscope and looks up and finds a photo of that and then uses the photo to create the 3D model. So again, this was in free trial mode, so I had a certain number of credits I could try, so I got to try this 4 or 5 times before I would have had to go on and purchase to continue. But it gives you 4 options for the microscope, and then you could pick one of those that you like, and then you can take it over to your 3D modeler. And if you don't like the I feel like it's got kind of a ravey kind of colors on there, you can remove those colors and replace it with your own colors, but you're getting the 3D model that you want to use for your VR or your training or however you might use it. All right, the last thing that I wanted to show within the AI section is virtual assistants or smart speakers, and a few ways they could be used. One is to provide performance support information. Another is to answer questions like a chat bot. Training via branching scenarios. You can imagine a kind of choose your own adventure step by step to see if you can make it through the scenario. And the last one I actually have an example of is a quiz where the learner can see if they can answer your questions. Let's see. Okay, so I have my trusty Alexa here, and I'm going to advance one slide. Alexa, open sales test example.
Hello, thanks for joining us at the Zamoxifan training seminar. We'll be running through a few practice questions. Try to answer each question succinctly but completely. Let's get started. On what website can I get more information to share with patients about Zamoxifan?
Zamoxifan.com.
Next, is Zamoxifan available in the EU?
Yes.
Next, what is the recommended dosage of Zamoxifan for an adult?
50 milligrams.
Thanks. At what temperature should Zamoxifan be stored?
25 degrees.
All right. What is the CPT code for Zamoxifan?
48084.
That's all. Thanks for participating. Your code is DEF.
So this is a genericized version of something that we developed for Alexa for a sales training launch. And we used a larger pool of questions, about 35 questions, of which 7 or 8 or something were selected each time. And what it does is it calculates your percentage right of all the questions that you're asked, how many you got right, and that based on that percentage creates a code, which then the participant would scan the QR code that has that code beneath it, and they then earn points in the sales launch conference towards rewards that they could get throughout all the learning activities that they did during the conference. All right, so moving to augmented reality. So this is going to be where you're looking at the real world and you're using the technology to have a digital overlay of information so that you see more information than what's just there in the real world. And the thing that you're using to add that could be a smartphone or a camera or a headset. So your examples here, Pokemon, where you're looking at your real world and a Pokemon creature is added. That's great, but not so helpful for learning. Next example, you see this in many sports. In football here, you're seeing where's the first down line. You see oftentimes in hockey, somebody's highlighting where the puck is if it's hard to see on TV. And last example, AR is just the initials for Arkansas there for fun. But let's talk about how augmented reality can be helpful. And one of the things that differentiates augmented reality from virtual reality is that oftentimes augmented reality is useful for helping someone in the flow of work on the job versus virtual reality where you're going to go away and practice. So example on the left, consumer example is showing a chair in the room that isn't really there, so you can see how it's placed. You might find this on the IKEA type app. So if you would imagine how that might go in the real world, if your job involved putting stuff into rooms, that would be helpful. Lower right, you see an image where you're looking at the engine of the car and you're able to see inside parts that aren't there, or that they're there, but you wouldn't be able to see otherwise. Same kind of a thing with the example here. This is from the DIA here in Detroit, seeing what the inside of the mummy would look like. And another example use case of AR is translation, holding the phone up to the sign that's in another language and having it translated immediately into English. So when you think about augmented reality and you think about the different ways you could get there, one of the lower end examples that's been around for a long time is hold your phone up or hold your tablet up. One of the drawbacks to that is that if it's the phone, you tied up one hand, or the tablet, maybe two hands if it's going to be comfortable. And it may make it harder to actually do your job if you're trying to hold the device at the same time. Next column over, you have a low-end headset. That's where you could insert a smartphone into the top and it allows it to mirror down into the device. This is called the Mirror Prism, and it follows the same type of approach as the early VR, where you would slide the phone into the Google Cardboard type device to be able to see. So this lets you see the real world and some additional information, but I would classify it as a low-end augmented reality as well. Next, the third column is smart glasses. And this is where it's going to be really helpful for electronic work instructions. If you have people who are doing basically repetitive jobs, but sometimes they get to a branching point and they need to pull up some reference information, or if they get stuck, they have a camera on these type of devices as well, where they could be looking at the work. They could open up a voice over IP call and have a remote coach on a computer somewhere log into Zoom or Teams and see what they're seeing and give them advice. The types of things you're going to see here is just a couple of lines of text display or a small picture, depending on what device, maybe a little bit more. But it's not the type of thing where you're going to really be able to blend the real world and the virtual world, so it's indistinguishable about, ooh, I inserted a new virtual object in that area. It's more like I'm looking at the real world and I'm looking at some pictures or some text or other things to get advice how to do my job. The high-end headset, Microsoft HoloLens, I would say was a leader in this space for the enterprise, and kind of questionable how much Microsoft is continuing to invest in HoloLens right now. Kind of competitor in this space now would be Apple Vision Pro and also Magic Leap. But the approach for the Magic Leap to be able to see the real world is you actually see through the glass and see the real world. And then we have some virtual elements inserted into that view. The Apple Vision Pro, the difference is that it seems to you like you're seeing the real world in virtual elements, but you're really seeing that the cameras outward facing on the front of the Apple Vision Pro are collecting the real world and merging it with what you see. And this idea that you would be able to have a headset where you could see the real world at any time and virtual elements mixed in is kind of the ultimate goal where everybody would like to be, but the amount of computing and battery life for that make it both expensive and bulky. And so it will probably take some time to get that to a reasonable price for most people and a comfortable size. And maybe for a while continuing to do things like put the battery separate connected by a cord. And I think most people in this tech space are predicting that long term you may end up with two different types of devices, a more lightweight one that gives you basic information added onto the real world that would be like a sunglasses size that you could wear all of the time. And if you wanted to go into a higher end virtual reality, it might block your view entirely of the real world and make more sense to use at home when you're not walking around out in public with it. So good uses of AR, just to summarize, when more information is needed in the flow of work, and when providing options is not convenient. In other words, you can't look at options in the real world because you can't swap them in like you could something virtual, and when hands-free operation is needed. So again, AR, high-level summary, great for providing additional information to help someone in the flow of their work. Any questions there before we move forward into virtual reality? Let's see, I see one content, thank you, Garrett. Amazon has incorporated AR into its catalog so you can visualize a piece of furniture in your space. And one thing that's interesting is a partnership between Meta and Microsoft is they're working on moving Microsoft Office documents into the Meta Quest headset in such a way that if there were a 3D model in the document that you would just spin it around on your screen to look at it different ways. When you look at that Microsoft, let's say PowerPoint document inside the MetaQuest headset, you can actually pop the 3D model out of the document and then walk around it and look at it in the VR headset. So I think as that stuff moves more from the specific app level to the operating system level, it becomes much easier for developers to include that sort of thing. It's going to become much more abundant. All right, moving to virtual reality. So an artificial environment that you're going to be looking at or listening to where you're going to be able to interact with the environment. So if you look at the Google Cardboard on the far right, where you would have slipped your phone into it, you really wouldn't have been able to interact very much. You'd have been able to look around, maybe use a laser pointer to push some buttons if you had the right version, but not interact so much. On the far left, you see Henry, a VR experience, which is near and dear to my heart because I actually met Maxwell Planck, who was the technical founder of Oculus Story Studio at Realities 360. I want to say that was in 2017 or 2018. And it was a group of about 300 people at that conference, all interested in AR and VR. And the excitement about AR and VR at that time was about what it has been with AI over the last couple of years within that group anyway. And what I expect to see is that while AI has the limelight right now, AI and AR and VR are all going to have a place going forward for learning solutions. In the middle, there's Jaron Lanier, and he actually worked at Atari and then founded a company that was focused on VR that had a headset that you could wear and gloves that you could put on that would track your hands. And you might be able to tell from looking at the computers and the background, much like what I mentioned with AI, the story with AR and VR didn't start in 2017. This was in the 1980s when they were working on virtual reality. And it took roughly from the 1980s to the early 2020s to get to where the equipment was small enough and cheap enough that in the Meta Quest system, it really has become a consumer thing that's reached 20 million people. Versus I remember in 1990 traveling to a mall to see a huge setup where you could put your head into the virtual reality headset, but it had to be lifted by a crane thing holding it up because it would smash you. It was so heavy. And the graphics were kind of vector art, like the Star Wars line art game, where everything was just lines. So virtual reality has come a long way. Let's see. Good uses of VR for training. So when work conditions are dangerous, when recreating the scenario is expensive, when it's impossible to recreate the scenario in the real world conditions, or when the scenario is difficult for the learner to envision. We have an example that we've developed in this last case where we're showing how an antibody fights a virus, and you can see it up close and take a look at how the antibody works. Here's a kind of a simple example of 360-degree video where you would look at the headset and click some hotspots. Here's an example, one step up from that there are tools that will let you create this kind of thing without needing to do any programming to get it done. You have some like 360 shots around the area. And in this example, it's to identify problems in the merchandising area. And if you can find all 5 of them, you can complete the scenario. This is that example of firefighting, where dangerous to practice in the real world, and you can only simulate so many scenarios. Maybe the firefighters might have a burning building they can go to and actually put it out, which would be great practice too. But this would let you set up kinds of scenarios that would be too dangerous to practice in that way. And I've heard some examples here where people will put on kind of like a vest that actually heats up to make it seem more realistic while they're doing this. Another really interesting thing in the VR simulations case is that recently the FAA just approved using virtual reality for pilots for using it to count for hours instead of using a flight simulator. And what they found there is that using VR is much cheaper than the cost of the rig of a real flight simulator to use, which they need to use because even more costly to use the real jet fuel for people during training to get all the training hours they need, and from my understanding, a shortage of pilots. So here's a kind of a clean room scenario, and we've developed some VR for that to help with aseptic technique in clean rooms. And then there's the case of soft skills. So while a lot of you would think a lot of what you would do in VR would be step-based tasks or practicing what might happen when something goes wrong, another place that it can be effective is because when you are in VR, it feels more like you are actually there than like you are watching it, like you're watching on television. It could really help to build empathy. And we've done one VR on the patient journey of a patient with a rare disease. And I think it really pulls on your heartstrings to feel like you're really there experiencing it. Let's see, so here's an example. I'm going to show just a little bit of this clip from a demo that we put together because some of our work is proprietary and we can't show it that we developed for our clients. But this example shows step-by-step instructions for assembling a toaster oven. And if you have Arbor XR, this is available for free for anybody to download onto their headsets, either Quest 2, Quest 3, or Quest Pro. If you don't have Arbor XR and you're interested in a demo, reach out to me. I'd love to have you give it a try, but I'll show a few second snippets here.
Hi, welcome to Tip Top Toaster Ovens. Join me on the production line to experience how VR can teach a step-by-step process.
I'm going to fast forward us a little bit here.
You could be electrocuted. Well done. The next task is to connect the dial's wires.
All right, I'll advance us out of that. All right, let me know if any questions come in. Tina, I'm going to transition out of VR into spatial computing and kind of distinguish what the difference is between spatial computing and AR and VR. So the first thing I want to say here is I'm very lucky that our office is located 1 mile away from the Apple store at Somerset. So I was over there on day one to try the demo. Also, if you're in the Metro Detroit area, there's Apple store in Novi and at Partridge Creek. I would highly recommend, because the price of this headset is too much for average consumer. While they have their free demos going, go over and give it a try. I've had a few people that I took over to see it after I did, and while it's very early in its infancy in terms of actual usefulness, um, some of the aspects of it are completely mind-blowing in the level of graphics fidelity, how real it seems, and how easy it is to use by just looking at things with your eyes and pinching your fingers. But what's really most interesting here is not per se Apple Vision Pro, but where the industry is heading as a whole in terms of how it envisions that these types of headsets might be used. And one of the really distinguishing features is that if you walk up at Apple and say, "Oh, I'm really interested in AR or VR," they'll say, "This isn't AR or VR, it's spatial computing." Why are they trying to make that distinction? The difference is that most of what's been happening with the Meta and HTC Vive headsets is once you get in the headset, you're simulating doing something physically like you would do in the real world. And Apple is looking a lot at the idea of not everything you're necessarily going to do is picking things up and simulations and stuff. They're thinking of using that headset just to give you a giant screen space that you don't need to take a computer or a tablet or a phone or anything with you, that you're looking at that headset, and then all of the apps that you used to use on your other device, your calculator, your calendar, your pizza ordering app, whatever, are all available to you, so that you could use them. And for some of them, the screen size wouldn't matter, but for some of them, nice to have a gigantic, huge looking screen instead of a small phone size screen. And so they envision it to be, after the mobile phone and the tablet, the next replacement as a general purpose computing device that could be used for any purpose. And some of the examples around going into, for instance, a Zoom or Teams style meeting in that headset versus going into the windows on a computer, it's really nice because you can see the other people sitting around and you can walk around and go over to them. It feels more natural. So I think some people might look at that and say, well, that's terrible compared to reality. And then, well, the response to that would be, well, yes, it is terrible compared to reality, but it might be better compared to the alternative of a phone or a computer. And if it's not feasible to get together with your relative on the other side of the country or the other side of the world, being able to do these things with this type of headset, when it gets a little cheaper and maybe a little bit smaller, is really seen as the future, not only by Apple, but also by Microsoft, also by Meta, also by Google, who will be releasing Android XR soon, also by Samsung and HTC, who are working on Apple Vision Pro competitors. And although I'm not an expert in the future, based on my past experience, watching people be at computers and say, why do I need a laptop? It can't do anything. It's not powerful enough. Okay, now I have a laptop. What do I need a tablet for? It's not powerful enough. It can't do anything. What do I need a watch for? I have everything I need on my phone. Why do I need a watch? I'm not going to get that. Right now, I'm in the phase where people are saying, I'm not going to need spatial computing. I have my computer, my phone, my watch. Why do I need that? I expect that this is going to be one of those things that might take 5-6 years to catch on, but it's going to catch on like wildfire eventually. The other argument I've seen is people say, well, people don't want to be isolated inside that device. They're going to be isolated from society. And the counter argument to that is go to any airport or a coffee shop, and what is everybody doing? They're already looking down at their phone, isolated. They're already isolated by their phone. The hope would be that if they're looking out through this device at the real world, maybe they'll notice it a little bit more than looking down at their phone, although I suspect it will be roughly about equivalent if they get these devices down to close to sunglasses size and you're using it to check your movie tickets and check the weather and get the news all the time wherever you're going. But at any rate, that's the vision for spatial computing. Whereas AR and VR, at least in the learning space, AR focused on performance support, VR focused on skill building so you can practice, and when it's time to do the real job, you're ready. And spatial computing, while it can do some bits of AR and VR, it really isn't focused on those real world things as much as bringing your apps in such a way that the screen size is not limited and you don't have to hold a device because it's mounted on your head. From there, happy to take any questions that you have, and my contact information is on the screen here. If you have a question that you'd rather ask me in private later, open to any and all questions.
Yeah, how often is Innovative Learning Group doing projects in AR and VR?
So over the last 3.5 or 4 years, during that entire time, there's been almost no time when we didn't have a VR project or overlapping VR projects. We've had a couple of AI projects, and we've had a couple of AR projects. I would classify them as being on the lower end, simpler kind of AR projects, whereas our VR projects have been very sophisticated. Any other questions?
Yes. How transferable are skills, instructional designer skills developed in the non-AR and VR world? To what extent are they transferable to those projects, AR and VR?
Oh, that's a great question. So some of the skills that you have are very transferable, and there are some new skills that you'll need to learn. So for instance, as an instructional designer, one of your key tasks is breaking things that you need to learn into the right size chunks and putting them in the right order and picking what's the right delivery method, right? So when we think about how we're going to teach something in VR, because the seat time in the headset is valuable, we look at what are the prerequisite skills that we should maybe teach you in an e-learning or a job aid first before you get to the headset, so that we could focus most of your time in the headset on the skill building or the actual practice of doing that task. The instructional designer's thinking about how to design it, how to break it up, what's the best way for people to learn. Should I be showing this, or should I be having them practice it? All that kind of stuff is useful, and instructional designers would know it from working on e-learning and instructor-led. But then there are things that are different in VR, like text isn't very readable unless you're up close to it, or you have to worry about the learner looking in the wrong direction where they're not seeing what it is they're supposed to be seeing. Or is there enough floor space available that they need to teleport to get to the next spot because they're going to run into the world in a wall in the real world before they get to where they need to go in the VR? You could really have a lot that you need to learn, but you could carry over a lot that if you didn't have, it wouldn't be good because you knew about VR, but you didn't know about instructional design.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, it looks like we're just about out of time. So do please remember to respond to the survey that you're going to receive in just a few minutes. Really would like to have your feedback. You're going to receive the slides and a YouTube link early next week. Thanks again and have a great day. I really appreciate having you here.